Okay. Okay, so Susan, are you going to start us off?
I am. So normally this is probably going to be I think that depending on the week, we will have more or less of context setting, sharing theories and practice. But today, I just thought we'd just take the time up front to relax into some of the premises behind this particular program, some of the premises around the opportunity that we have to learn together, and what's happening both in the specific environment of disability services, but also moreover what's happening in the world to kind of give us a view of what could be possible. So I'm just going to
I can't see me for some reason.
slideshow.
She's doing slideshow.
Here we go. Can everybody see this? Yeah, look okay. Great. So welcome to this program. So again, the plan for today is why are we here? So we've all introduced ourselves and kind of got a good sense of why we're each here. We're going to talk a little bit about the approaches that we're going to explore. Before we finish up today, we'll start to have a conversation around expectations and focus. I think we're already beginning to understand how we're going to work together and the practicalities. So I think there's already been sort of quite a wide level of reasons for being here. For some of you, it's bringing your business into the 21st century. For some of you, it's just always feeling like you're enjoying being on the forefront of what we can try and experiment with. And also recognize that most of your organizations aren't, they're services companies in human services, which is a little bit different from the standard multinational, but yet have very similar attributes. And Gallup is really good at running these polls around engagement, and they just published their most recent one over the last month. And this is an example of something that I'll flick into the Slack channel to read about, because fortunately, these numbers haven't really changed. Only 13% of people are engaged in the workplace and 63% are not. And 24% are actively disengaged, which means that they are not only not engaged, but they're actively acting against the best interest of the organization. And Australia specifically is... sorry, I've misspelled engaged, is a little bit different. So 24% engaged, 60 disengaged, and 16% actively disengaged. And there is really evidence that the culture that you have in your organization does impact the quality of service and support that that people and families receive. Kate, did you want to speak specifically to this slide?
Well, I think people would probably recognize Urella would have been last year, possibly 18 months ago, had a huge abuse scandal. And, at the heart of that, the culture of the organization was highlighted as an issue. The picture down at the bottom left-hand corner is, you may have come across this is a big English scandal. It was a place called Winterbourne View, where an undercover reporter went in. It was an assessment and treatment service, and discovered some horrific abuse. And again, when that whole case went to court, the culture of the organisation was at the heart of it. And then interestingly, in WA, there was a report released last year about positive behaviour support. And again, at the heart of that, it just kept reiterating and recommending it's the culture, it's the culture, it's the culture. So I think any organisation, good, bad or indifferent, having a focus on the culture is probably very, very important.
Absolutely. So why rethinking organizations? There is a growing body of evidence around alternative ways to think about and run organizations. We'll talk a little bit more about those today. Approaches, structures that provide everyone with the possibility of relating different to their work. And part of this is around what I kind of consolidate down to 3 words: autonomy, agency, and relatedness. You can also call it self-direction, purpose, and connections. Connections that we have with the people that we're working with and the people that we serve and our community at large. If we talk about the kind of common complaints from the workforce, they tend to reinforce what I just mentioned in the previous slide. So the management styles are old-fashioned. We are still, for the most part, operating organizations in the same way that we started operating organizations in the early 20th century as the Industrial Revolution and the thought of workforces or workplaces being like a machine in a factory, that everybody is a cog in the machine. The role of management is to optimize those cogs in the machine. And at the end of the day, everybody is replaceable because, machine parts are clearly defined. Old-fashioned management styles. Work that's uninspiring, work that is maybe formulated like a cog, and look, this is what you do. Don't look to your left or your right. Just head down, do the work that's on your job description. It's not very inspiring. Feelings of being disengaged, having working environments that are not conducive to flourishing as a human. These are all common complaints. Command and control isn't working. Quick fixes aren't working, but it is time, I think, to consider a new direction or a different way. And in our workplaces, in the human services sector, if we want to be sustainable and continue to attract, let alone retain, the younger generation to our workplaces, we're going to have to really get our heads around what this workforce wants and needs. And they want and expect accelerated responsibility, a clear path to leadership. And when I say clear path to leadership, I don't mean like, what are the rungs on the ladder that I need to climb? It's like, what do I need to do to feel like I have got the capacity and capability, and I'm welcome to bring my individual leaderly qualities to the workplace, and to have greater purpose and meaning in the work they do, and more flexibility in how they work. And this is coming through there's a lot of momentum behind this. There's that will of the workforce. There's the pull from the front by thought leaders. So the very fact that you're taking time out of your daily work to be here, to be curious, to want to experiment, to want to participate, you are those thought leaders that are at the front that is going to be pulling this change forward. And then there's that pushback from the generation that's here now and the generations that are to come. And pressure is really mounting, and you can't afford not to educate yourself and to start practicing these new ways of organizing. If we think about the assumptions that have been made about the workforce, and again, reflecting back to this old paradigm, this old way of thinking about organizations as machines, assumptions that people are lazy, assumptions that people work primarily for money, and that their own interests are more important than the organization, and that they're not capable about making new decisions. I feel even, certainly for me in my career and in my work life, I've certainly felt that I've had bosses or leaders or managers who have thought this way. I mean, I'd like to hope that I never have as a human, but I've certainly experienced it. But remember this slide. So if we talk about, what is the driver here? And I even do get a little bit triggered and confused and upset about this whole current definition we have of engagement. But for me, engagement is more about a net promoter score, or would I recommend this organization to somebody else? It's more about, am I in a role where I'm doing meaningful work. I'm appreciated. I appreciate others. I'm growing every day, or at least have the opportunity to learn and develop every day. And I feel really, really good about the work that I'm doing. It's much more than engagement. And, you know, this this silly t-shirt is too often, especially again with large organizations, they spend so much money and every consultant on the face of the planet to teach them how to supposedly get engagement, but it doesn't stick. And as our friend Albert Einstein said, we can't solve the problem by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So I'm gonna, in a second, I'm gonna take us out of this slide and I'm gonna put us into a little bit of a small group reflection. So what I'm gonna be inviting you to do in pairs or in groups, I think we'll do one pair and one three, is to think about these questions. What comes up for you when you think about the words self-management or self-organizing? And I'd like you to consider what could be the best things about that and what could be the scariest things about that. And even better, if you can think about a time where in your work life you have had more or less autonomy, or you have had a boss or a manager that was more or less command and control, or where you've worked in a team where it's felt like you've just absolutely been in flow because there was no one person telling everybody what to do, but you were all collectively understanding and sensing what needed to be done. What did those things feel like? So I'm just gonna take us now out of, oops, I just need to stop sharing my screen here. Kate, can you just type into the chat those questions? And I'm going to use the very clever capability of Zoom called breakout rooms to send you away to have a conversation. I'm going to give you about 8 minutes and then love for you to come back and reflect together on what you've learned. And Katina, no, I can't see you now, but that shouldn't matter. So when you think about self-management, what does that bring up for you? That's the first question. Think about a time when you've experienced it. What could be the biggest potential that a change in the way of working towards something more self-directed feel like? And what could be the scariest risks to that? Think about experiences you've had. Any questions before I send you away? Okay, so just the way breakout rooms work is that I will put you into the rooms. You'll have to click on a button. When 8 minutes is up, you will get a 1 minute warning to say that you've got 1 minute to wrap up your conversation. Then you don't need to do anything. You'll automatically be brought back into the room. So here we go. Right, there you go. Have fun. See you soon. Who'd like to share first?
Wait, where's my questions?
Your screen. Do I supposed to share the screen?
I don't think it will, but when the one is in speak mode, they probably share their speaker.
Just muted her again. Carry on. Who'd like to share?
I'm happy to share, Susan. So in our group was Neroli and Katina, and we just talked mainly about what are some of the great things about allowing self-direction and more autonomy for people as part of your team. And the main thing, I think positive things that we found, there's Katina, she's on the screen now, was the fact that people bring their own unique skills and gifts and talents to the roles that they do. And so if we're controlling that all of the time, or we're only allowing people to, use the skills and talents that we think are important, then we don't get that variety and that, the benefit from the wider perspective and the wider gifts and talents that people have. So there's a real benefit to allowing people to be more autonomous, because you get a greater variety and of experience, lived experience that is then put into the work, and it makes for a really great experience. The scary part about all of that is that, and we shared about this, was obviously, as we were talking about, culture is so important. And I was saying that when I joined this organisation 4.5 years ago, it was a train wreck, and the culture was just so dysfunctional. And so we've spent a lot of time working to build a really positive culture where staff really enjoy working here. And then, of course, and the reason we focused on that was because if staff enjoy what they do, then they provide good services, and the people that receive services or that are part of the organisation that we're supporting get the benefit of that. So the scary part is, though, that if you release people to be more autonomous, the risk, I guess, is that the culture can break down. People can go off in their own direction and do their own thing, which is not a bad thing sometimes, but you don't want that to go off in dysfunctional ways. So what we talked about was the trust, to know that the values that you've built up in the organisation and that everyone holds as common will continue to be that way as people become more autonomous and as teams work more autonomously. That the culture remains, a positive culture remains. So that was what we particularly talked about. I think that covered everything, Katina and Neroli, unless you've got other stuff that you want to add to that.
No, that was right. That was well articulated. And I guess the only other thing I wanted to add was around the connecting those values that we talked about there to reinforce the culture that you were bringing.
Okay. No, I agree with Graham with everything that you said. The only thing that we found is that we still need to have some processes in place for them to follow, so they don't get lost if you're not around. And because if they haven't got those little processes to follow, they go off on their own. And then, look, this morning I got another phone call that one of the employees, she wasn't paid something because not enough attention was being paid to the timesheets. A small little thing, but it was money that was owed to this employee. And one of the staff, because they didn't read the paperwork properly, they should have followed all the process and they didn't. So they still need to have that guidance in following certain processes as well. They can be autonomous, but follow the rules that you've got laid down in the organisation. The reason we have that is so that nothing gets missed. And then you don't have any problems from employees out in the field. And does that make sense? Yeah? So you still have to have those. You can't just say go off and do your own thing, and they still need to be guided and to follow the processes that you put in place. And these processes, we always sit down and we do them together. We say, okay, how can we improve on them? If you've got a better idea, talk to us, because people's ideas, I'm a certain age now, so my ideas might be a little bit more old-fashioned than theirs. They come to me with new ideas and say, hey, this could be done in a better way, because they think differently, and then we adjust them to make sure that these things are put into place so it suits everybody, even the younger generation that we're trying to train up for the future. But they still have to follow a certain process not to be able to miss any information, so that then we end up with problems. Now I've got a problem that I have to fix because it was missed.
Okay, thanks, Katina. What about the other group?
You want me to go, Natalie? Okay. We spent a bit of time just introducing one another. We hadn't met before, so we spent a bit of time learning the organisational context. In Natalie's case, Aviva, quite a big organisation, have moved to recently developing self-managing teams, I guess in response to the emergence of NDIS and a need to be more efficient. Am I kind of roughly in the ballpark? Yeah, okay. And so there's two types of self-managing teams with Aviva. One is the direct service provision to people with disabilities. And then there's another one with the back end of the organisation with the support for that, I guess. And so recently a team leader in Natalie's area was made redundant, and the formation of self-managing teams. They're right in the stage of forming right now. So setting what the guidelines, the rules, the expectations, learning one another. So it's quite an interesting stage in that self-managing team's development for Natalie. In my case, I had to go back in history. We're probably not in the game of self-managing teams for Atlas, but I shared with Natalie some experience from an organisation that I worked for about 10 years ago as Geraldton Resource Centre. And Centrelink had, at that time, a couple of years before that, gone to self-managing teams. So massive, big Australia-wide organisation doing self-managing teams. And because I had a client group that was, in a lot of ways, referred from Centrelink, we had a lot of kind of close connection with various people involved in self-managing at Centrelink in our organisation. I then had a little bit of a dabble with self-managing teams in a mutated form. Geraldton Resource Centre ran a range of services, but at the two extremes, so human services, the two extremes, I had lawyers and I had social workers. And so if you kind of know much about them, they come at a social problem from complete extremes. So a lawyer will get a lot of problems and try and narrow it down to one that can be solved. And a social worker will hear one and open it up to lots of other kind of underlying causes. And then I had some people in the middle of that were trying to manage complex casework. So we tried self-managing teams to manage complex cases. And I just shared with Natalie at that time, I just did not have the game as a manager to pull that off properly. I think since then, after 10 years of consulting and a bit of study and a bit of experience, I probably could do a hell of a lot of better job at that. But the key out of that was that we discussed the kind of role of whoever's supporting a self-managing teams in picking up the skills of mentoring and coaching has been really useful to self-managing teams. And I think that's about what we got. Yeah, that's about it for us. Yeah.
Great. Anything to add, Natalie?
Not so much. It was really just that. It was around the support. And I think there's a bit of a misconception that self-managed equals, free for all. Everybody just, hey, there's no bosses and nobody knows what the hell's going on. So I feel like a lot of the fear and uncertainty sits with that. But it's the opposite of that. It's more, once everyone's working together in a really respectful way, it's around the clarity. So, natural leaders will form dependent on the job, and, the accountability and that sort of stuff is crucial. So yeah, the framework that supports those things to get people making decisions and not having things left and, working well together is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, really. It's what Graham was sharing about creating the conditions for people's skills and talents and joys to be kind of released. And, Katina's noticing that you still have to pay attention to those, very specific processes to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks. That it's not easy. It's my theory is that it creates a much better environment for people to flourish and provide better service, but that doesn't mean it's easier, right? So I think that there's the two sort of biggest misconceptions about self-management or self-organizing teams or more participatory organizations is one, that it becomes a free-for-all because everybody's just running off doing their own thing, and the second is that somehow it's easier. I think that neither one of those things are true. So what I thought I'd do is just maybe spend the next 15 minutes or so just digging into a little bit more of like the actual theory of what some of Kate and I's thinking is. So again, this is really the shift from what I was describing before as designing for people as what could be liberated if we decided to allow people participatorily to help design the systems that they need to flourish in their work and in their workplaces, and again to provide an amazing service for the people that they support. And I mean, it's already happening, and it has been for a while. These are the two books that really have been the most influential in my journey and my experience. And Reinventing Organizations, if you go to reinventingorganizations.com, if you've not read the book, you can download it for free and pay what you feel it's worth, which I think is a fantastic model. There's the sort of textbook version, but there's also a more concise, consolidated, illustrated version. You can download either of those for free, pay what you want, or you can buy through Amazon. And the second is An Everyone Culture by Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy, two Harvard professors who have been working around the psychology of human development since the 1960s and what they've discovered. And the thing that I like most about both of these books is they're not just theoreticians spewing a new view of the world. Both these books are actually curations, which means that in the case of Fred Laloux, he, as a McKinsey consultant, started noticing organizations in all different sectors, all different fields, and all around the world that were doing things differently around some very particular ways of organizing. And he pulled together this really brilliant synthesis of what it takes in his mind to become a next generation or next stage organization. And similarly with An Everyone Culture, Keegan and Leahy discovered organizations around the world that are practicing this idea that everything that humans need to continue their development beyond, back in the day, Keegan tells a story that, he's been doing this for so long, he needed technology to catch up, because he had always espoused the vision that we continue to grow and develop until the day we die. But the hard scientists, the neuroscientists were saying, no, our brains are fully formed by the time we're, I think it's, 19 for a woman and 22 for a man. And that, no, we don't keep developing after that. And it wasn't until about, 10 or 15 years ago when MRIs started being able to show, beyond a shadow of a doubt that our brains are making new connections and new pathways and continuing to grow and iterate absolutely until the day that we die. And so the idea that when we, it's an assumption, it's assumed that when we're in school, when we're in secondary school, that we are not only learning information, starting to embody our opinions in relationship to the things that we're learning, but also doing our psychosocial development around what it's like to be in a group, what empathy is, what compassion is, what a bully is, all of these things. And then all of a sudden, the assumption is that when we get to the workplace, that those psychosocial dimensions are kind of tossed out the window because nope, you're the cog in the machine and you're here to do this job, and we need to pretend like life is life and work is work, and you put on your mask when you come in and take it off when you get out, and it's like, it's kind of absurd, right? Because our development is playing out in every relationship we have, in every dimension of our life. So again, Keegan and Leahy found organizations that really had taken this to heart, and not only paying attention to the company's responsibility for nurturing the ongoing development of their people, but also like this big aha moment that the problems and the conundrums and the opportunities that we have in our work problems are actually the perfect kind of soil for us to do the development. I know it sounds a little bit esoteric, but hopefully over the course of the next 8 weeks, we'll begin to understand how that actually works in practice, because we're going to be doing it here as well. So I've talked a little bit about 100 years ago, when the Industrial Revolution and what this kind of meant in terms of how we organize our businesses, so how we do the effective matrix and predict and control and have a shareholder perspective and what it's about in terms of optimizing the machine. But I mean, you go back, into the whole course of human history, when we were foraging bands of tribesmen, just trying to stay alive, and there would be one person chief that emerged as a leader, and that's who we all served. And then when the distributed authority around the church and around the military started to construct these more distributed, formalized hierarchies of command and control, and everybody's the same and everybody's in service to the top of the pyramid. In the 1960s and 70s, the whole movement around consensus and relationships and harmony, that was probably really a reaction to what was happening in the world wars of the earlier part of the 20th century. Call it the hippie movement, call it the commune movement, that brought the power of relationships in organizations more to the fore. And I think that the opportunity that we have now is really the kind of being able to look and see all of these forms, understanding that all of these forms have their place, and it's not the idea that one is necessarily better than the other, but that we're at a stage of human development now where we can see how synthesizing all of these ideas could actually allow us to emerge into something different. And the big questions around this. So what do organizations that are modeled around this potential next stage of development look and feel like? And can we actually describe what they look like? Is it even possible to create organizations that are free of, this really strong word, pathologies of politics and bureaucracy and infighting, and where we don't have such a tremendous risk of stress and burnout and apathy and resentment? Is this even possible to create organizations that feel and look like this and express themselves like this? And then, the hypothesis of if we can actually develop organizations like this, would that actually make work more productive, fulfilling, and meaningful? And like I said earlier, there's an ever-increasing body of work and examples that this hypothesis is true. Can we create soulful workplaces? It's not easy. It takes a lot of hard work. This is just another. I just really love this graphic because it's it's a more interesting way to kind of look at this, that one is not excluding the other, but as we kind of go up the circles, this is what's possible in all the different kind of manifestations of how we can be in groups and with power. So from, command authority and up to process and hierarchy and competition and profit to, values and balance and culture. What's the next level of that? Distributed decision making, a higher purpose. Organizations that are anti-fragile, that appreciate people bringing the whole of themselves and everybody's unique gifts to the workplace. And there are, as I said before, organizations that are modeling this way of working. And those are the organizations that are featured in the books that I've mentioned.
Susan, can you say a little bit about Morningstar and Bertsorg? Just because if people aren't familiar with them, I think it kind of helps.
Absolutely. So
make it real.
Yeah, Morningstar is again, just completely random. They process tomatoes. So they process tomatoes, and I think it's something like 90% of all the tomato-based products that are produced in the U.S. are produced by Morningstar. And Morningstar is a factory that is completely self-organized. So they have, I think it's maybe around 500 full-time employees, and then about 2,000 additional seasonal workers. And they have no line managers. So they all report to each other in small organizing teams. They set their own salaries. They create their own work schedules. And yeah, there's absolutely no middle management or line managers in that organization. Bertsorg is probably the best and probably the largest example of truly self-managed, self-organizing teams in the world. So they are nurses in the Netherlands. Joost de Blok was a nurse, and he got absolutely just heartbroken by the fact that all of these large service providers were taking over the home healthcare industry in the Netherlands, that were doing, time and motion studies to, okay, you get 30 seconds to wipe a bottom and 3 minutes 20 to change a dressing, and we might give you a minute 30 to have a conversation, but then you need to be out the door. And what they were saying were the outcomes for the people they were serving, the outcomes for the relationships with the families were just being absolutely devastated and decimated. And Joost and his initial crew decided, no, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to self-organize into groups around neighborhoods who our principal purpose is to provide the absolute best care and experience for the people that we're serving. And we predict that people might pay more for this. And so they've gone from nothing to, I think now 13,000 nurses in over 900 neighborhood teams in the Netherlands, by far the biggest provider of in-home health services in the Netherlands and probably in the world. So those are two examples of organizations from completely different industries that we can learn from. And that's the big benefit of this. Is I'm not making this up. This isn't theory. This is actually working. These are just some more kind of attributes of the different ways of organizing. I talked earlier about the book Reinventing Organizations and the three things that Lalou noticed in terms of what was different about these organizations. One, as we've been talking about, is self-management. So finding the key to create these fluid systems of distributed or decentralized authority, and at the same time being able to leverage the collective intelligence, because we're no longer assuming that tenure or height on the pyramid is the correlation for great ideas, because it can just happen not only from anywhere in the organization, but also how it happens within the collective cells that are formed in teams or groups. Also, the idea of wholeness, like it just seems so silly that this whole thing that we've been taught, that our work and life are separate, and that I can't bring my creative impulses to the workplace because they're not welcome. That Narrowly can't bring the fact that she's a fantastic cook into the workplace because that's not related with the job that she does, or that Zane can't bring his zany, I don't know, sense of humor into the workplace because it's not what's appreciated. You know, how can we actually be vulnerable enough, build the levels of trust where we can actually bring our whole selves to work? What could that unlock? And then this idea of evolutionary purpose, which I think is the hardest to describe, but I think one of the most powerful. Like, for example, what happens in this group, in this collection of humans that's going to be undergoing this experience together is completely different than what would happen if we had a different cohort or a different group of people. What is possible is only possible from who's in the room, what we had for breakfast, how we're feeling that day, what the weather is, what we've got on our minds. The idea that every single construct of human relationship has got its own purpose and it keeps changing. It's hard to get your head around, but I think it's pretty interesting and pretty important. It's certainly one of the things that Fred noticed in the organizations that were doing things differently. And so this comes back to the question that I had earlier, that I said, please remember what I said about what the assumptions we make and what we've been taught about what's important. I'm sorry, I'm just checking my clock here. About what's possible in organizations. You know, we've been taught people need to be managed, and that there's somebody that gets paid more money to make the decisions about whether or not you've got a job, how much you get paid, the work you're allowed to do. This is the story we tell ourselves about what work needs to be. But do we really believe that people can be trusted, and that we can, given people the right frameworks and process and scaffolding and help and support, that we can actually distribute authority? It's a choice we need to make as leaders, right? You know, the idea that we bring masks into what we do around, you know, our ego, and this masculine perspective is the only thing that's valued. And then beyond that, the masculine rational perspective is really the only thing that's valued. So if you see that, if you could imagine this picture as having 16 different components of how we can be, you know, emotional, intuitive, spiritual, yeah, sure, rational is one of them, but all of these have female and feminine dimensions as well, and interpersonal dimensions. If we're only ever bringing our masculine rational perspective to a problem, that's like cheating ourselves out of heaps of different ways to solve a problem, all kinds of different ways that we can approach the possibility. And again, you know, life is not like a machine. It's that we can only optimize and that everything is replaceable. It's really like an ecosystem, right? It's always evolving. It's always adaptable and responsive. It can sense what it needs, and it'll become what it needs to become if that's the way that we choose to approach it. And, you know, these are some of the ways that it might look. It's like moving from a hierarchical pyramid to, you know, coaches with no management authority, or from, you know, everybody having this job description that you're given when you sign your contract that you never look at again. But what could it actually look like if we are saying, okay, this is actually the role that I'm doing today, and this is the energy that I have. There's so many different ways and opportunities that we have if we just open our minds to them. And, you know, in most organizations as well, everybody is doing a second job that you're not getting paid for, which is covering your weaknesses, trying to look your best. You know, this fear that we have of being fired or being bullied or being belittled or being made fun of, or that you're not good at your job. It's you know, this is what we've been taught. This is the story we've been told since we were yay high. But if we can weave that, if we can find a way to be more vulnerable, to bring more of ourselves to work, to maybe say, look, I'm here now and I'm doing the best job I can, and this is what I need help with. If we wove that into the opportunity that we have at work, what could be different? And this is the idea of nothing extra, that an organization shouldn't have to compromise between supporting the ongoing development of the people and financial returns, because ultimately there is a way to do that without adding time or cost. And it's interesting. One of the phrases that's in the zeitgeist a lot here is this whole notion of safe space. And yeah, absolutely, we need to have the psychological safety to be able and be willing to bring more of ourselves to work. But we can't do that at the detriment of actually developing and getting into that place, that sweet spot where it's not something that you just know how to do and is just like muscle memory, and this level of stress and burnout where, oh my God, I'm just completely freaked out. But how can we organize so that we're living most of our work lives in this zone of development? It's possible. We just need to pay attention to it. So again, the DDO practice is that we do this all the time. There's no trade-off. We've all got personal development plans, and the business requirements or the curriculum. This is all possible. And
Susan, we've got a few minutes left, just so you know.
I'm going as quick as I can, and we'll have 5 minutes for checkout. And so, the idea of, how does this work? We need to start somewhere. And these are the kind of areas of potential that Kate and I see that could be interesting for each of us in the course of these 8 weeks to look at running some experiments around, creating some hypotheses about what could this look like? What could it look like narrowly if you wanted to really dig into this concept of adult relationships? How do we get away from this, toxic behavior that we all have of somebody presenting as the parent and somebody presenting as a child, for example? What about, if Zane wanted to look at, so how could we maybe feel more comfortable about distributing decision-making by sharing more of the context about the financials of the business, for example? These are all things that we can start to look at, and in the next time we meet, I hope, we'll get a chance to really explore what might be more interesting, more or less interesting to each of us. So I've just talked a lot, but going back to the original provocation is, do we believe that workers are lazy and they need to be watched to ensure they do the right thing? Workers are selfish. Workers are not good at making decisions. Workers should be compensated by the hour, but bosses should be paid a salary. Or do we believe that our people are thoughtful and trustworthy? They're accountable, can be accountable for their decisions and action, are going to make mistakes, but have talents and skills that will make positive contribution. And really to be thinking about what our individual underpinning assumptions are and what we believe the underpinning assumptions of our organization is.
Okay, thanks, Susan. So we've only got a few minutes left, right? So Susan talked about it at the beginning, I think, when I came off to make the call. The people who've been part of this program have chosen one of those topics that Susan just had up before, and have chosen to run an experiment. That's what people have been calling it, an experiment, a pilot. So some areas, there's one organisation on the other program whose senior management team are part of the program, and they had a standard practice where when one of them was off, somebody acted on their behalf. And they've been running experiments that there is no action, that the responsibilities of that person are given to the team, that the delegated authorities are given to the team. And, lo and behold, the sky's still there. Nothing happened. Nobody died. And it's interesting watching that team. I suppose, I think initially they were kind of, this is brilliant, look at what we did. We've also saved a bit of money. And then have started to question, well, we are needed, I think. What would it look like if we didn't have these roles? And so they're the kind of things that organizations have looked at.
Another one that I loved was somebody just gave a credit card with no limit on it. Yeah,
that's right. So to support staff. So support workers were having to go to their coordinator. You know this, the typical story, going to the coordinator who would then, approve or not approve in terms of spending money. And they did a rule around use the money in a way that is in the best interests of the person. And they issued all their staff with 2 teams, I think it was, with credit cards, and are running that experiment. So there's a whole host of them. There's one team who are looking at 20% of their time to just work on stuff that they're interested in, not on stuff that is in their task list, which, that was the kind of way that it's Google Drives, wasn't it, that was created through a kind of hobby, or the 20% non-direct time. So between now and our next call, we will post more information in Slack. We'll definitely put that list up, in terms of what are the areas that you might want to think about in your organisation. One of the ways that the previous group came to their decision about their experiment was to think about what's going on in their organisation and where's the area that they're least effective. Where's the area that you think your organisation would benefit from if you were willing to run something or have a go at something that you think would make a difference. So we'll post that in. We'll post a reminder to it. So if you have a lovely weekend and then forget about this call, you'll get a reminder early next week to say, have another look in this Slack channel and remember that. So does that feel okay? So when we come back together, you'll have done some thinking about what you're willing to experiment with. The other kind of really quick thing just to say is that these 2 programs, because there's quite a bit of interest in organisational design or organisational structure in human services, we've asked organisations if, in running their experiments, if they're willing to share them in a publication that will be published by Waze, that will go out sector-wide. So just have a think about it. You don't have to, but it is something that we'd like you to think about. Okay.
Great. So I will post up the video and the slide deck and the questions. And I promise I'll never talk for 25 minutes nonstop without breathing again. But I'd love for us just to finish up on time in 2 minutes with a checkout. So we always will begin with a check-in and end with a checkout. And just like to invite maximum 3 words about how you're feeling differently than you felt an hour and a half ago. And I can start. Out of breath. Kate.
Well, no. Interested and curious.
And maybe we'll do a tag. So Kate will tag the next person and then the next person will tag them.
Graham.
Challenged but excited. Zane.
I'm all ears.
Who are you tagging?
Oh, sorry, Natalie.
Inspired, but mildly overwhelmed. Narrowly.
Ready to bring wholeness. Katrina, of course.
Okay. Yeah, inspired and wanting to know more. And Graham.
Graham,
No,
when?
Graham's been
Already done.
Oh, you've already been,
Okay.
have you? Have we finished, have we?
Yes,
Okay.
we've done.
Fantastic.
Okay, so we'll see you in 2 weeks. Keep your eye on Slack. Anything interesting that you think we'd all benefit from, post it up there. And we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
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 Bye.